Hi grade 6 and 7, welcome to our next lesson of music history. Hopefully you had a great understanding that was provided by us looking a bit further into the Romantic era, what was going on, the context behind it, the ways industries were evolving and how that lended a hand into the development of new musical instruments and how that brought about the urge to look for something deeper and not to rely on simple science and machinery, but also to look at the human heart and the human emotion. Today, we're going to step a little bit back. We're not going to be in the Romantic era, but we're going to be looking at someone who sort of crossed over from the classical to the Romantic era. However, he is considered to be a classical composer, not a Romantic composer. Our composer for today is Gioachino Rossini. His name sounds absolutely nothing like the way it is written, but I still want you to be able to get the spelling right and to get both of his names right? Both of his names. Gioachino Rossini, even though it looks like Gioachino Rossini. So he was a classical composer, and very important dates that you need to jot down. The classical era is agreed to be from 1750 to 1820, and the Romantic era, even though it's blurred as to its beginnings because it's sort of just, it was birthed as time went on, it is still commonly agreed that it was from 1820 to 1910. So the classical era from 1750 to 1820, the Romantic era 1820 to 1910. Our composer was born within the classical era, so he was born in 1792, but yet he ended up living through both the eras and died in 1868. But he's still considered a classical composer. Don't consider him a Romantic composer. At a very young age, it was seen that he was definitely musically talented. However, he was not like some of our other composers. He was quite lazy. In other words, he had the talent, people saw he had the talent, but he just wasn't serious when it came to schoolwork. He actually retired as a foodie. What is a foodie? A foodie is someone who loves the different tastes of all these different cuisines. And he was well known for inviting people to his house for gourmet dinners to try the finest that the land had to offer. But that is way too far ahead. Let's take a step back and let's actually see how he became who he became. So in his early years, like I said, he showed talent as a young musician, but he wasn't at the level of a prodigy. Why? Because he did not fan the flame. He did not put the time that was needed to take his talent to become a fully fledged skill. He was lazy. He wasn't serious about practice or schoolwork. But soon enough, his talent began to grow and he became increasingly skilled on the harpsichord. By this time, the piano wasn't fully developed. Remember, the piano came later on in the Romantic era when it allowed for stronger strings, better hammers, and just a well-made piano, something that could be much louder. At this time, he still had to resort to the harpsichord. And by the age of 12, he was working at the local theatre company. So he was starting to take his practice a little bit more seriously, not just a little bit more seriously. He decided to become his life, and he saw that this is where he would end up. So he was composing original music by the time his family moved to Bologna. I'm not too sure if that's where Bologna was made or where that's where Bolognese sauce came from, but he moved to Bologna at 12 years old and he was composing his own original music. When he was 18, he dropped out of school to support his family financially. That happens sometimes, and back then that was very much the norm, where the boys, the men, when they became men, they would have to step up, get jobs, and be able to support not only themselves but also their family. He was, however, given an unexpected commission, and this was known as his big break. It was a one-act opera for a Venetian opera house, so an opera house in Venice. His life was about to take a significant turn because he accepted the commission, and the opera he wrote, that one-act opera, was an absolute hit. His goal was to write a full-scale opera in 3 years, and he accomplished that goal. And he experienced success and continued to be established as a composer. He was young, successful, and popular, and the style of music that he wrote was comedic. It was known as opera buffa, so it was very relatable for the people of the time. It was in the local dialect, so it was a language they could understand. It was very simple melodies, not complex moving melodies that you have to be an intellectual to be able to understand and to be able to speak of, but just very simple melodies that the average workman down the road could understand and that people would be looking forward to, and that they would end up being able to hum the tune or melody by the time they finished watching that opera or that one act in the opera. If radios existed in the 1800s, it would be Rossini's music playing through the radio because it was the pop music of the time, because everyone loved it. He was the pop star of his day. The piece we're going to look at today is the Barber of Seville. By the time he was 24 years old in 1816, he had already reached the height of his popularity. Imagine that, you're peaking out by the time you're 24 years old. And he wrote the Barber of Seville, which premiered in Rome, and he wrote this piece in 15 days. That's something quite noteworthy. Barber of Seville was based off of a trilogy of plays written by a playwright called Pierre Beaumarchais. So the Barber of Seville was the first in the trilogy of plays, and the second one was actually Figaro, which was taken up by Mozart. So Rossini wrote the first play, The Barber of Seville, and Mozart wrote the second one, Figaro. But Mozart did this way before, and it premiered like 30 years earlier. The only problem with this was there was a lesser known composer known as Giovanni Paisiello, and he had already written an opera that had the exact same name, and it was well loved, and he was also called The Barber of Seville. So this made Gioachino seem a little bit arrogant and a little bit cocky, because an opera with the exact same story and the same name. So this caused a bit of issues. In fact, on opening night, there were a bunch of hecklers that were hired in order to disrupt and heckle and cause problems for Rossini, in order to teach him a lesson. Legend has it that he was so upset, he refused to conduct the show for weeks. However, regardless of all the hecklers and all the hate he received, people could not deny the genius of his music, and eventually it was an absolutely embraced hit. It was stuck in people's minds, and it was one of the greatest operas ever composed. Go ahead and have a listen to it and let me know if it sounds familiar.